The wind carried dust across the wide valley, soft as breath, cruel as memory. Jonah Reed rode slow, reins loose, hat pulled low against the dying sun. He'd been riding since dawn. No destination, just away. Away from the grave he'd filled with his own hands. The land stretched endless gold and bone, whispering through the sage. Evening fell like ash. He wasn't looking for anyone. But sometimes, the world doesn't ask what you're ready for. It just gives you something broken and asks if you'll pick it up. His horse stopped, uncommanded. Ears twitched, nose lifted toward the canyon hollow. Jonah followed its gaze. Something moved down there, near the dry creek. He dismounted, boots crunching gravel, rifle slung over his shoulder. The last light painted the rocks blood red. Then he saw her. A woman lying half in shadow, half in moonlight. Face pale, dress torn, hands bound with frayed rope. Jonah knelt, cut the rope with his knife. Her eyes fluttered open, wide, frightened, not seeing him yet. "Easy," he said, his voice low, calm as still water. "I ain't here to hurt you." Her lips moved soundlessly, dust choking every word. Jonah pulled the canteen from his saddle, lifted her head. She drank greedily, coughed, then whispered, "He left me. Out here. Who did?" But she'd already fainted again. He lifted her gently, carried her to his horse. She weighed near nothing. "All right, miss," he muttered. "You're riding my seat tonight." He settled her before him, one arm around her to steady her. The horse started slow toward the canyon ridge, moon rising over the plains. Each hoofbeat echoed like a heartbeat. By the time they reached his shack near Dry Creek, the stars were out full. Jonah pushed the door open with his shoulder, laid her on the cot. The place smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. He stoked the fire, fetched a blanket, and covered her. She shivered even in sleep. Burns marked her wrists where the rope had bit in deep. Whoever did this hadn't meant her to live. He poured coffee, sat by the hearth, watched the flames until his eyes burned. He'd sworn he was done helping strangers. After losing Clara, after burying the child that never drew breath. But here he was again, dragging kindness out of the ashes. Morning broke quiet. The woman stirred, blinking against the light. Jonah turned, hat in hand. "You're safe," he said. "Name's Jonah Reed." She looked at him like he was a ghost. Where am I?" "Dry Creek, closest thing to home I got." Her throat worked. "Why'd you—" "'Cause you needed it," he said simply. The answer silenced her. She sat up slow, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. "Name?" he asked. "Clara." She hesitated, eyes darting away. "Clara Finch." He nodded once. "You got folks looking for you, Clara Finch?" "No," she said too quickly. Then softer. "Not anymore." Jonah didn't press. Some wounds you let speak on their own time. He cooked beans and cornbread. She ate little, silent, hands trembling. He noticed the bruises, the scar near her temple. Somebody had owned her once, in their mind at least. He'd seen that kind of fear before, the kind that flinched at kindness. Days passed like wind through dry grass. She began to walk outside, bare feet in the dust, feeding the chickens, fetching water. Jonah didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. They spoke in small words. "Morning. Coffee's hot. Storm's coming." But in those silences something began to mend. Slow, fragile, like thaw after a long frost. One afternoon, Clara found a small wooden horse on the shelf, carved rough, worn smooth by time. "You made this?" she asked. Jonah nodded. "For my boy." "Where is he?" He looked at the ground. "Didn't make it." She said nothing, but her eyes softened, the way grief recognizes itself. That night thunder rolled over the hills. The firelight danced on the cabin walls. Jonah sat sharpening his knife. Clara sewed a tear in her dress. Outside rain fell heavy, washing the dust away. Inside the quiet felt almost human. Then came a knock. Hard. Sudden. Jonah stood, hand on his revolver. The door swung open before he reached it. A man stepped in, tall, clean-shaven, coat slick with rain. "Well, well," he drawled, eyes on Clara. "Ain't this something?" Clara froze. Her hands went white around the needle. "Didn't think you'd crawl far, sweetheart." the man said. Jonah's jaw clenched. Friend of yours? He asked. The man smirked. Husband. Jonah's thumb rested on the hammer of his Colt. She said she was left for dead. She lies, the man said easily, stepping closer. She stole from me. Ran off with what's mine. Clara's voice cracked. You beat me half to death. She talks too much, the man snarled. You best stay out of this, cowboy. Jonah didn't move, didn't blink. She's under my roof now, he said. That makes her my concern. The man's hand went for his gun. Jonah's moved faster. One shot. Clean. The man fell backward into the rain, mouth open, no sound. The thunder swallowed everything. Jonah stood there a long while, smoke curling from the barrel. When he turned back, Clara was trembling. You killed him. Jonah holstered the gun slow. He gave me no choice. She backed away. They'll hang you. Maybe, he said, voice quiet, steady. But he wasn't going to hurt you again. The rain burned down harder, washing the blood into the earth. Jonah dragged the body to the creek, buried it beneath the stones. When he came back inside, Clara sat staring at the fire. Her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking. He poured her coffee, set it beside her. Drink, he said gently. You're still breathing. That counts for something. She looked up at him. Fear, sorrow, gratitude, all tangled like barbed wire. Then she whispered, Why would you risk everything for me? Jonah's eyes met hers, steady and sad. 'Cause somebody once did the same for me. Outside, the storm died. Inside, the fire still burned. And for the first time in years, Jonah Reed didn't feel like a ghost. She slept until noon, as if the sun itself had decided to let her keep whatever rest she could find. When she opened her eyes, the light looked new, like it had been washed, the dust of yesterday gone from it. Jonah was at the table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, staring out the window where the canyon cut a dark line through the day. He didn't look up when she moved, didn't say anything, but the silence in the cabin had become something steady between them. Not hollow, not hostile, just true. Clara sat up slow, the blanket falling from one shoulder. The marks on her wrists had faded to angry purple. The bruise on her temple throbbed in the light. She remembered the man at the door, the slick coat, the smell of river and whiskey on him. She remembered the way Jonah had moved, calm, almost sleepy, and then the way the hammer had fallen like thunder, final and clean. For a while afterward, the image of the man's eyes stayed in her head, flat and surprised. She'd told herself many things about herself that weren't true. She was not, she realized, the only one who'd had to learn to breathe again. Jonah set another plate in front of her. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. His face held the kind of softness that came from deeds you didn't parade. You should go into town, Clara, he said finally. Get some proper clothes. Ain't much for a lady here and folks talk. Keeping you hidden won't help neither of us, she swallowed. What if they ask questions? They'll ask. You answer when you're ready. For now, you let me make the worst of it look simple. Ain't no one coming for you, not while I'm here. She looked at him. A man like him, stooped a little from a lifetime of honest labor, fingers thick with toil, said things like a man who had measured danger and found it bearable. Why? She whispered. Why do you keep doing this? Why take me in? He shrugged, which was the most honest thing he did all morning. Because I know a little about not being seen when you need it. Somebody helped me once. Ain't right to forget that. Clara dressed in the old dress Jonah gave her. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and smoke. When she stepped into Dry Creek for the first time since she remembered walking away from a life that had been a cage, the town was as small and sharp as a blade. A single main street, boarded storefronts, a saloon with half its sign hanging crooked, a general store with jars of candy for the children and rope for the men. People paused in their tasks to look. Jonah walked beside her like a weathered shadow. Whispers followed them. It was like being watched by 100 small hands. She kept her head down. She didn't know the rules of these people, the names of their kin, the politics of grudges. All she knew was fear that sat in the ribs like a dull stone. Jonah's presence was a kind of shelter, the way a porch keeps off the rain. He introduced her simply. This here's Clara Finch. She's looking for work. If you got a spare job or spare boots, you'd do us both a favor." Words had weight here. A man's name said whether you belonged. Jonah's name opened a few doors and closed others. Mrs. Barrett, who'd been like the conscience of the town, tart and tidy, narrowed her eyes and nodded. Mary Gibbs, the blacksmith's widow, gave Clara a cloth and some plain instructions on how to sort nails and hold a hammer. Not all of them welcomed her, but not all of them spat either. That was something, Clara thought. That was more than she'd expected. The first week wore a map where scars had been. Little steady things stitched her to the days. Waking early to fetch water, kneading dough until her palms ached, sewing patches on other people's trousers for a coin or two. She worked for meals and a little pay, and for the first time she saw the horizon as something she might walk toward rather than away from. But rumors don't sleep. They move like foxes, sly and quick. Warren Kent, who kept the town ledger and the town mouth, sniffed at the new arrangement. He kept his notes clipped to his vest pocket, and his opinions clipped to his jaw. It wasn't long before his observation took the shape of complaint. "A stranger in Reed's house," he said at the council table, eyes bright as a hawk, "with a widower and his children. We must look after the welfare of the town." Jonah heard it all the same as Clara, like small rocks thrown against the cabin door. He'd felt such stones before. He knew how easy it was to break the quiet. The sheriff, a man named Boone, listened with his hat in his hands. Boone had the look of someone who'd been made sheriff because nobody else wanted the job. He was solid, made of slow decisions. He took down Kent's complaint with a pen and a sigh. "I'll do my duty," he said. His voice suggested he hoped the duty was simple. The town gathered. It was always surprising to Clara how a room full of people could look like a jury before a verdict had even been spoken. Jonah kept his jaw steady. Hope came to stand beside him sometimes. This girl of his who laughed like wind chimes and read the Bible the way some read maps. Eli, quiet as a house at midnight, watched Clara as if trying to lift the right words from his pocket. The children were sometimes better barometers of truth than grown men. At the gathering, Jonah spoke. He didn't rise to a heroic cadence or a flourish. He told it the way the land told things, plain and honest. "I found her at the canyon," he said. "She was left there. I brought her back because she's a person. If you find that a sin, you'll have to find a way to forgive yourselves." Kent argued law and decorum. He found witnesses who swore they'd seen strange goings-on. The thread of gossip tangled and pulled. Clara stood quiet, fingers threaded in the hem of her skirt. Then, because Jonah had given her a small, dangerous courage, she spoke. "I was married," she said, the words falling simple as stones. "He beat me. He broke things in me I didn't know how to fix. I left, but he found me. I walked into the canyon because I didn't see another way out. I crawled back because I wanted to live." Jonah didn't ask questions. "He gave me bread. He gave me a roof. If that's a crime, then I've broken the law on purpose." Silence stretched, then pulled like a tightened wire. Some faces softened. Mrs. Barrett, who had been ready to be the town's morality, looked away and wet her lips. Mary Gibbs, without a word, placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. It made a small sound in the hush, like a needle going through fabric. The sheriff, Boone, folded his hat in his hands and looked at Jonah like he had the right of it. The crowd dispersed with some choosing mercy, some choosing scorn. The law took its slow time, but the town took its side quicker, and sometimes faster than a ledger could record. Life, after that, began to shape itself in new ways. Clara learned to stand at a loom and make patterns that pleased Mrs. Barrett's frugal eye. She learned to bake bread that started the whole town sniffing the air with hunger. She taught Eli how to whistle the simple tune his mother used to hum. For a time, Eli's silence unwound into an attempt at a note, and then a whole small melody. Hope braided Clara's hair like a child braids string, an offering of trust. Jonah watched from the doorway with his hands in the pockets of his coat, and sometimes he let his face show something like relief. Not all storms are made of rain. Kent did what Kent did best. He held small meetings in the saloon and talked about the town's reputation. He gathered signatures, wrote letters to magistrates in the East, claimed he was safeguarding tradition. He was a man who moved in neat lines and expected the world to follow them. The trouble was, the town didn't belong only to men who liked neatness. It belonged to the ones who fed it and mended its plows, to the women who scrubbed its floors, and to the children who learned the songs. Those people had started to speak for Clara, too. Months passed. Winter thinned into a brittle spring. The first green nails of grass pushed through the earth and stung the air with a smell Clara had almost forgotten existed. Freshness, newness, possibility. Sarah's garden, Jonah's wife's place, began to respond like a heart that had learned to beat again. Clara bent over the shoots each morning and whispered to them as she watered, like talking to people who might listen. "You keep growing," she'd tell the greens, "even when it's hard. That's all there's to it." One evening, Jonah found a ring in his hand. He'd carried it on a thong around his neck since Sarah's passing, like a small map of a life that had been loved. He set it on the table between them. He didn't make a speech. He didn't have to. The kids were laughing outside over something small, jar lids and the music of tumbled joy. Clara looked at the ring, then at Jonah. Her eyes were wet. They held the memory of the canyon, of the man at the door, of a life that seemed to have not any place for kindness. "You sure?" she asked, voice like fine thread. Jonah laughed once, a sound that shook off the last of his ghosts. "Ain't ever felt more sure of anything in my life." He brushed a thumb across the band, then slid it from the table to his finger. "If we do this, we do it proper, out front with the whole town looking." He paused. "They can hold their judgments in their hands while we stand on what we know is right." The day they married was simple. Reverend Thorne stood in front of a small gathering. The church bell chimed like something waking from sleep. Mrs. Barrett had sewn a dress in cream so plain it shone for its honesty. Mary Gibbs pounded a pot with the rhythm of a blessing. The town showed up not as jury but as witness. Some faces were there because they'd grown to care. Others because curiosity is a stubborn thing. When Jonah kissed Clara, there was a hush that felt like permission. Eli, who had found his voice in pieces, sang the lullaby he'd learned, Sarah's song, clear and unwavering. Hope planted flowers at the grave as a kind of bouquet for anything lost and then found. The sun that afternoon spilled gold over the pasture like anointing oil. People clapped not out of obligation but from a small, glad surprise. Later, as twilight eased into a gentle night, Jonah and Clara sat on the porch with their hands clasped. The air smelled of bread and wild grass. A boy named Samuel, who had become the last piece of their family without really meaning to, ran past chasing chickens. The cabin glowed from inside, where the table had 4 plates, and sometimes 5. The world made room for more than it had at first thought possible. Clara leaned her head against Jonah's shoulder. "You saved me," she said, not like a debt, but like a fact they both knew. "No," Jonah said, quiet and tender. "You saved me. You taught my boy to speak, and you taught me to try livin' again. We saved each other." They listened to the soft chorus of night. Crickets, a distant dog, a child's laugh that wound off into the dark. The canyon moon rose, big and pale, and it watched like an old friend steadying its light on them. Clara closed her eyes and felt the long line of her life finally lean the right way. She had been found beneath the canyon moon, and had found, in return, a place where to breathe and where to belong. In a world that often chose judgment, 2 people had chosen mercy. That choice, it seemed, could start a small revolution. It could make a home, and so the land learned to forgive. The town learned, too, slow as a sunrise, how to bend toward kindness when it saw it standing steady. The seasons kept coming, as relentless and generous as ever, and each year the garden grew a little fuller, the children a little bolder, the porch a little more crowded. Under the canyon moon they had rebuilt what had been broken, not by erasing the past but by making room for the future. Hope, after all, had a stubborn habit of taking root.